All the very latest from around the world now with the ITV News at 10.
The targeting of Ukraine civilians by Russia condemned around the world as at least 50 people, including children, are killed as they attempted to flee. Today, at a Ukrainian train station packed with fleeing refugees, a rocket attack, and seconds later, bodies lay strewn at Kramatorsk station. It came on the same day as the president of the EU visited the site of the Bucha mass grave of Ukrainian civilians.
Here in Bucha, we saw our humanity being shattered, and the whole world is mourning.
And our correspondent Peter Smith was at the scene of another horrific attack on civilians not far away.
They're not expecting to find anyone under this rubble still alive. They are now looking for the missing and trying to uncover more of the hidden horrors from this war.
Today, the Prime Minister condemned the attack and pledged more significant military aid for Ukraine. Also on News at 10 tonight. Double trouble for the Rishi Sunak and his wife. He admits he had residency status in the US even as he was appointed Chancellor. And tonight his wife says she will pay UK taxes on the millions she earns around the world. Sabina Nessa's brutal murderer is sentenced as her family tell us how her death broke their family.
How could he hurt my sister? My whole world just crumbled down.
Slapped down for this slap. Will Smith banned from the Oscars for 10 years. And flowers for all seasons. How an eyesore on a Cornish beach inspired flowers with steel petals.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. It was meant to be their route to safety. Like thousands before them, civilians crammed into Kramatorsk railway station in Ukraine's east this morning. Fleeing Russia's bombs, they had with them the few small worldly belongings they could carry. But in an instant, their lives were taken from them. At least 50 killed in Moscow's latest indiscriminate attack. As you shall see, it was a truly horrifying scene. And even after the bodies were taken away, clues remained on the platform as to who it was Vladimir Putin's forces apparently considered suitable targets. Backpacks stuffed with cuddly toys, a baby's pram. They were ordinary families, many of them women and children.
Kramatorsk train station. Women, children and babies crammed together. All here because they've been told for days to evacuate their homes in eastern Ukraine. A new Russian invasion is expected any day. They've come to flee for their lives. This morning, a bomb was fired into the middle of the crowd. It doesn't get much lower than targeting refugees, desperate people at their most vulnerable, forced to watch their loved ones now die in front of their eyes. Everything exploded, this witness says. It was all of a sudden. Many people are dead. The regional governor says at least 50 have been killed, 5 are children, and 100 more are injured. In the Kramatorsk hospital, the damage done is all too clear. Psychologically, this is hard, the nurse says. All these children killed, I can't find the words. This man asks, what have Ukrainians done to deserve this? Remnants of a missile were found with a message written in Russian. For our children, it says, suggesting it was a deliberate attack carried out in revenge. They are Russian fascists, this man says. They even wrote on it that it was to avenge their children. The US says this was Russia, using an SS-21 ballistic missile, but the Kremlin has denied Russian responsibility. And speaking to the Finnish parliament, Ukraine's president was clear nobody could mistake Kramatorsk for a military target.
This is an ordinary railway terminal. People crowded, waiting for the trains to be evacuated to the safe territory. They hit these people. There are witnesses, there are videos, there are remnants of the missiles and dead people.
Senior EU representatives today came to Ukraine under pressure to get tougher on Russian sanctions.
How are you? Thank you so much.
While here, Ursula von der Leyen was taken to Bucha to bear witness to another atrocity from Russia's invasion, where civilians have been found executed.
Here in Bucha we saw our humanity being shattered, and the whole world is mourning with the people of Bucha.
The massacre in Bucha shocked the world, but President Zelensky has warned what happened in Borodyanka is even worse. Here, Russian bombs have ripped through people's lives and their homes. It was sudden, the kitchen is set, the last meal still sits on the table. This is not a rescue mission. They're not expecting to find anyone under this rubble still alive. They are now looking for the missing and trying to uncover more of the hidden horrors from this war. The dead here are still being counted, 30 found in 3 days. But they know more than 100 at least were hiding in the basements when Russia's bombs fell. Each ruined apartment in Borodyanka is now a tomb to a mass grave below. We met one woman who has come to the rubble every day, just waiting for news on her son and his family.
I
can see the body of my daughter-in-law, but my son and my granddaughter are buried too deep. The fire service can't reach them yet. I'm staying here, waiting for them all.
Ludmila shows us pictures of her son and his wife. He was a doctor, she was a nurse, at the same hospital in Kyiv. Yiva was their only child, just 4 years old, no threat to anyone. We find one survivor from their apartment block who shows us the makeshift bunker they had tried to hide in with his family.
It happened around 9:30 p.m. when we were just going to sleep. There was a strike. We were looking for this family. I was trying to pull them out and kept shouting, but there was no response.
For targeting civilians, Vladimir Putin's army stands accused of more war crimes. We heard testimony today they also stopped emergency services here getting in to help the injured. Any survivors trapped in the rubble were left to die slowly. And in the days ahead we will find out if this is one of the biggest civilian massacres from this war. Peter Smith, News at 10, Borodyanka in Ukraine.
Well, from the news strikes today to what we are seeing firsthand on the ground around Kyiv, each day brings new evidence of the horrors being inflicted on Ukraine's people. Those scenes in Peter's reports came from Borodyanka, just outside the capital, from where Russia's forces have now pulled back. Their focus is now shifting to the Donbass region in the east, where that railway station in Kramatorsk was hit today. Ukraine's president has now called for more support to repel that renewed attack when it comes. And today, Britain responded with £100 million worth of military aid.
It is an inconvenient truth, but every day Olaf Scholz's Germany and the rest of the EU pay Russia more than £300 million for oil and gas, triple the support Boris Johnson offered the Ukrainians today, despite his anger over the attack on Kramatorsk.
The attack at the train station in eastern Ukraine shows the depths to which Putin's once vaunted army has sunk. It is a war crime indiscriminately to attack civilians, and Russia's crimes in Ukraine will not go unnoticed or unpunished.
Germany says it will stop buying Russian gas, but it will take 2 years to get there.
It is not feasible to get gas instead from Russia today from other places in the amount we need it, and this is the same with most of the other countries in Eastern Europe or also in the south. So it is a big investment into infrastructure.
The Ukrainian military have been making effective use of Western-supplied equipment like these anti-tank missiles. The new £100 million British support package announced today will include another 800 NLAW anti-tank missiles, JAVELIN anti-tank missiles, STARSTREAK anti-aircraft missiles, as well as helmets, body armour and night vision goggles. The Prime Minister also said there would be new state-of-the-art loitering drones. News at 10 understands that means something similar to the latest Switchblade system, the kind of equipment British forces don't yet have.
In terms of what the UK is sending, there's obviously a little bit of a difference between what the MOD is sending and what the MOD has asked British industry to come up with to supply the Ukrainians. So some of the things that are being supplied are coming straight from industry, and they're not necessarily solutions that the UK has in its own armoury.
But the Ukrainians want heavier equipment, and they are starting to get it. Today, the Slovakian military donated an advanced air defence system. Earlier in the week, the Czechs sent tanks. As the Ukrainians prepare for the next phase in this conflict, the anticipated struggle for the East. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
Back to Peter, who's in Kyiv tonight. Well, Peter, we saw those awful scenes in your report about civilian casualties, but as we were just seeing Carl's report, more heavy weapons are heading to Ukraine, and there is another side to this story in the war, isn't there?
There absolutely is. What we are seeing on the ground here is the tide starting to turn. Now, starting is an important caveat there, because in areas that Russia was occupying, we are now able to go and bear witness to some of these atrocities. There are still pockets of Ukraine that are being occupied, and of course we know about that renewed invasion that's expected. But ITV News understands from Western intelligence sources that this war is actually winnable for Ukraine, and by that I mean total victory, pushing the Russians completely out, not even sacrificing a small pocket in the east. But that's only going to be possible if they get the support and the backing from the international community, and that means weapons. Now, we are seeing steps in the right direction. We've seen Czech tanks make their way into Ukraine. We're seeing Slovakian air defences and heavy artillery now making their way to the front lines, and these are, as I say, steps in the right direction, but the Western intelligence sources are stressing that these are only baby steps, and in order to push Putin right back, it's going to take a lot more support. And from what I've witnessed on the ground, from what all of our teams in Ukraine have witnessed, that is imperative, because we know the callous cruelty that the Russian troops are capable of.
Peter in Kyiv, thank you so much. To politics here in the UK now, and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak and his wife Ashkata Murthy have spent the day trying to answer thorny questions about their tax affairs. Yes, whilst he was Chancellor setting tax for the rest of us, he also held a US green card, allowing him residence in the US, requiring him to file a tax return there. And yes, she, a multi-billionairess Indian citizen who technically doesn't have to pay UK tax on foreign earnings, will now pay tax here on her international income after a row over her non-domicile status. But that doesn't appear to be the end of it. Tonight, Labour said Mr Sunak still has questions to answer and demanded full transparency.
It started with questions over his wife's tax and residency status, and now the focus has moved on to him. Rishi Sunak and Akshata Murthy are both under fire. The Chancellor for having a US green card, giving him residency in the US, and his wife for her non-dom status and the tax she pays on her foreign income. Today it was the Prime Minister who stepped in to offer this defence of the man who some have viewed as his greatest rival.
I would just stress that the Chancellor, Rishi, is doing an absolutely outstanding job, and as far as possible, as I think I said yesterday, I don't think people's families should be dragged into things.
Not long after that press conference, a spokeswoman for the Chancellor released this statement. Rishi Sunak had a green card when he lived and worked in the US. Upon his first trip to the US as Chancellor, it was considered best to return his green card, which he did immediately. All laws and rules have been followed, and full taxes have been paid where required. But the green card, which he had for more than 18 months while living in Number 11, has tax implications, which raises questions about whether the Chancellor has been paying into the US coffers.
You don't pay double tax, but you pay the worst of each tax system. If one tax system is at 20% and the other is at 30% on the same source of income, you would pay 20% in one and 10% in the other, you would be paying 30%.
Earlier this evening, attention returned to Murty, who announced that she would now pay UK taxes on her overseas income. The multi-millionaire Indian citizen said she didn't want to be a distraction for her husband. But Labour say there are now concerns about the Chancellor and his family.
Well, I think this raises very serious questions about the Chancellor's judgment and about what kind of special arrangements that he's had in place that most people don't. I think he really has to come clean about what his arrangements have been, what his family arrangements have been, as well as trying to sort things out now.
After what has been a difficult few days, the Chancellor will now be wondering how severe the reputational damage from all of this will be.
And Shihab is here. Shihab, it's fair to say that the Chancellor and his wife are by no means out of the woods on this yet, are they?
Absolutely. There are still so many questions. I think the biggest one, I was speaking to a Labour politician earlier who was saying, why? Why did the Chancellor have this green card? What was the motivation behind it? Those are the questions that they're going to be pushing on into next week. He had it when he was elected as an MP. He had it when he was in the Cabinet. He had it when he was a junior minister. He's had it for some time. And the question is, for what purpose was that? And it's gone across the pond as well. It was mentioned specifically in the White House today as well by a journalist to the White House press secretary, because one of the guidelines is that you can't have a green card if you're a member of a foreign government, which of course the Chancellor is. And that's a question that didn't really get a response as of yet. So those need to be answered. When it comes to his wife, when you're a Chancellor who at the moment is navigating us through this cost of living crisis and you are being criticised for raising taxes, the perception of what this looks like is something that you would expect opposition leaders to be pushing on going into the next week or so.
I think this will run a little bit more. Thank you, Shihab. Sabina Nessa's family have spoken of how they were broken by her death, but today they at least got some justice as her killer was jailed for a minimum of 36 years. The primary school teacher was walking through a London park to meet a friend when she was randomly attacked by Kochi Selamani, beaten repeatedly over the head. Her murder came just 6 months after Sarah Everard's and reinforced national campaigns for women's safety. In sentencing, the judge said it had added to the sense of insecurity felt by women walking alone at night.
My sister was funny, lovable, caring. She loved fashion. She was a shopaholic. Very girly girl. So yeah, like wardrobes popping at the seams because there's too many clothes.
Sabina Nessa was 28 and on her way out on a Friday night when she was murdered by a man she didn't know. That man was 36-year-old Kochi Selamai. He refused to come to court today to be sentenced in person for his crime. Sabina's grieving family were there to listen as the harrowing details of her death were read out.
How could he do that? How could he hurt my sister? My whole world just crumbled down.
Kochi Selamai went out that night looking for a lone woman to attack. Earlier that day, he'd checked into the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne, just a few minutes' walk from his own flat. He then drove 60 miles in a hired Nissan Micra, finally parking up in Kidbrooke just after 7:30 p.m. There, he went into Sainsbury's to shop for a weapon. He eventually left with a rolling pin, but it was this 2-foot-long metal warning triangle he used in his attack on Sabina Nessa as she made her way through her local park. It was a journey that should have taken 5 minutes, but when Sabina Nessa walked into this park, Kochi Selamai was already here waiting. A CCTV camera captured the moment he attacked her, hitting her repeatedly over the head until she was unconscious. What happened to Sabina Nessa reignited a debate about women's safety. The judge said today her death had added to the sense of insecurity felt by women walking through the city at night. But 6 months since this vigil, her sister says not enough has changed.
After my sister's attack, I was scared to walk down the streets alone. There's not enough support out there. I feel like it's more words than actions.
Sabina Nessa's killer will spend at least 36 years in prison for what he did. Her family will have to live with it for a lifetime and say they will always be wondering why. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
Not long ago, the idea that we could all go about our lives as we wish whilst COVID infections are running at record levels would have seemed improbable, perhaps impossible. But that is the freedom which vaccines have given us. Now the NHS is deploying another tool as we try to live with COVID. A new drug called Pavloxid has found to cut hospitalizations and deaths by 88%. Is to be given to the most vulnerable patients to take at home. It does, though, come with a hefty price tag, and trials haven't yet established any benefits to those already vaccinated.
The crowds were back at Aintree today. It's easy to forget COVID hasn't gone away, but for the vulnerable, it certainly hasn't. And this is the drug that the NHS believes could help us all leave the pandemic behind. Paxlovid, a new antiviral that's sent out to the highest risk patients if they catch COVID. When that happened to Kathy, she became one of the first in the country to receive them.
Seeing that positive test immediately made me feel rather angry because we realised that after all of being so careful, it still had managed to contract COVID.
But she phoned her doctors, who prescribed her the new antiviral.
They put them in a taxi and sent them to me. So basically within 24 hours of having a positive lateral flow test and feeling unwell, I had the drugs.
The treatment aims to stop COVID replicating. Pfizer, the drug company that makes it, said their trials showed it cut hospitalisation or death by 88% in high-risk adults.
But some are questioning whether it works quite that well and whether it's worth the vast sums of money that have been spent. The trial was done in people who hadn't been vaccinated, and it's claimed we simply don't know how much it reduces the risk of hospitalisation in people who have had the jabs.
Some experts say it's unclear what value it brings.
These drugs were tested in 2021, where there were much more serious variants of COVID around, and a lot of people were not vaccinated. The trials only looked at unvaccinated people. In Britain now, the vast majority of at-risk people have been vaccinated.
NHS leaders say they're always learning.
Just 2 years into the pandemic, not only do we have highly effective vaccines, but we've got highly effective drugs. That's a remarkable achievement by the scientific and clinical community. But of course, we still need to know more. We still need to do more clinical trials.
Kathy will never know the difference Paxlovid made to the course of her illness, but she will now be part of real-world evidence, helping us to understand how to protect the most vulnerable from the virus. Deborah Cohen, News at 10.
Well, while our top priority is protecting the most vulnerable from COVID, China's leaders are still in pursuit of totally ridding their country of it. To that end, as we reported on Wednesday, the major financial hub of Shanghai is under a strict lockdown. The trouble is, it doesn't appear to be working. Cases have jumped from 3,500 when it began to more than 21,000. And the city's 26 million residents are paying a heavy price for their government's policy.
These are the grim conditions in which tens of thousands of people are being quarantined in Shanghai. This footage was taken by Thomas Venet, who was sent to one of the city's so-called COVID camps after testing positive last Saturday.
Fortunately, now I'm perfectly healthy, so it's easier maybe to go through this. But I'm surrounded with people who are sick, who are always coughing. I don't know if you can hear the noise. Like right now, it's like this every 3 seconds.
He told me it's like living in a box and said there's an atmosphere of tension and anger, partly due to sleep deprivation.
We have no windows, so we don't know if it's day or night. We cannot go outside, we cannot breathe the fresh air. This big light in front of me, on the top of me, they never ever turn off or... Yeah, it's always, even at 2, 3, 5 a.m., it's always the same.
With case numbers still rising, there's no sign yet of the lockdown working. And in recent days, the extreme and in some cases cruel actions of the authorities have been exposed. The relatives of this elderly man wheeled his bed in front of their community management office to try and get him taken to hospital. But because he wasn't sick with COVID, he was ignored, and he subsequently died. This woman was distraught after being told she might be separated from her baby.
You take us away but leave a 4-month-old child who is still breastfed at home? What are you trying to do? Do you want him to die?
Millions of people are also down to their last rations of food. Local deliveries are promised over the weekend, but the supply chain issues stemming from here will be far-reaching. The port of Shanghai is the busiest in the world, and activity has dropped by 30%. There is hardly a product or trade that will not be impacted. There are currently more than 20 Chinese cities in some level of lockdown. That covers an estimated 193 million people. 2 years after the first COVID-19 outbreak here in China, the country is facing its biggest containment test so far. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Beijing.
Well, after Will Smith dramatically strode on stage and slapped the comedian Chris Rock at the Oscars, thoughts soon turned to what the long-term implications would be. Well, we now know one of them. Smith has been banned from the all Academy events for the next 10 years. Rishi Davda joins me. Rishi, it's a massive step for the Academy, isn't it?
It really is. For an A-lister to be banned from the industry's most prestigious awards for a decade, it's a very, very strong statement. But it feels like Will may have forced their hand by resigning from the Academy before any meeting over possible sanctions could take place. Essentially, they were considering suspension or expulsion, but he left before they could do that. So they had to think of a punishment for the actions which they called both harmful and unacceptable. So after Will went up on stage and slapped comedian Chris Rock after he made a joke about Will's wife Jada's shaved head, a result of the condition alopecia, Will later then won the award for Best Actor. And while some people say he may have been stripped of that award, I don't think that was ever realistically going to happen. Going forward, we don't know if Will can still be nominated for an Oscar in the future. I don't think his career's over, though. Hollywood moves very fast. It's more a case of when rather than if he'll return to our screens.
Okay, Rashid, thanks very much indeed. Tiger Woods is back in action on day 2 of the Masters in Augusta after his impressive comeback to competitive golf yesterday. The 5-time green jacket winner didn't get off to a great start, bogeying 4 of his first 5 holes, and will need to steady himself if he's to avoid an early exit from the tournament. And finally, how many of us have been enjoying a walk in the countryside or along the seafront only for it to be spoilt by the sight of someone else's discarded rubbish? Maybe you picked it up and put it in the bin. Or if you're Chris Beardsmore, you got a little creative.
The beauty of a rose is apparent, irrespective of its origin. It's why Shakespeare wrote in Romeo and Juliet that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Although you have to wonder what he would have made of a rose formed from a beer can. The craft of making roses from aluminium begins in Chris Beardsmore's back garden. He relies on donations from the community, free raw materials, usually sent to recycling, but instead cut up into metal petals.
Many people said, "You're nuts, you're crazy, you're going to do this making roses out of beer cans." The original idea was, maybe put a couple of extra steaks in the freezer, but not to be doing it on a full-time basis, working 12, 15-hour days.
Chris is a publican turned professional carer who tinkered with discarded cans until one day his idea blossomed. No one would imagine it would pay the bills, but as the sweet smell of a successful idea started to travel, so the craft became a career.
The orders just kept coming in and coming in and coming in, and I found that because I was still working, the time that I was able to dedicate to it just wasn't enough. So I said to my employer, I said, "I'm really sorry, but I've got to take this step," and it was a huge risk.
Talking to me in the shop he now owns, Chris is an entrepreneur. His roses are dispatched all over the world. He's expanding the business and is managing his way around the prickly problems of growing it. Perhaps because unlike real roses, these metal creations are long-lasting and have smooth stems. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Cornwall.
Lovely story. And that's it from News at 10 tonight from me and the rest of the team. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.